Good morning, everyone. This is a really fun day for St. Thomas, I think. Let me know if you can't hear me. I'm only loud when I sing, so I'm not going to do that right now. My name is Jan Gilley, and I've been coming to St. Thomas for quite a few years. But I can't beat my husband because he's been coming here since he was 7 years old. His grandparents didn't go to church, but he stayed the summers with them, so they dropped him off and picked him up. And of course, when we moved up here, we had to come to St. Thomas. I decided to work on a master's degree from Wesleyan University, and I really enjoyed the classes down there. I felt very challenged, and one of the classes was a writing class, and I just wrote a little story about Maine in it, and the professor talked to me and said, "You should expand on that. You should do something, longer, bigger." Well, there it is. And I also was, the topic came to me because my husband Roy's great-great-grandfather, Howard Gilley, was the lighthouse keeper at Curtis Island. And we have paddled our kayaks out there more than once to walk around Curtis. And sometimes take children or grandchildren out so they could see it. And it also happens to be one of my favorite things to paint. I have all kinds of different angles and situations with Curtis Island in it. Now, I don't claim to paint like this, but my brother, who is the artist in the family, did paint the cover for me. And he also has a painting in the other room that he gave to the sale today. And he's the real artist. And we don't know where this artistic stuff came from. My mother was a sort of poet. My father was a clergyman, so he wrote a lot. But it was just something that we did at home. We were read to. We had to sit and listen to Dad's sermons my whole life. And of course I complained then, but I inherited his notebooks of sermons like this, which I am now rereading. So the part of writing and reading and sharing, I guess, is just something that came along with my genes. Anyway, because of all this history of Maine, and of writing and of the ocean, I had wrote a little short story about people living on an island in Maine. And when I was looking for something to do for my master's thesis, the professor said, why don't you expand on this? You could do all kinds of things with this story. So I did. And I invented a little family that lived on Jib Island, which was not as close to the shore as Curtis Island. It was out there. And they had to get all of their stuff on the island with boats, and they didn't have helicopters then. The parents had to teach the children at home, and there was a room designated as a school room where they had to go and do their lessons and do their reading. And of course, living on an island out in the ocean, they had just tons of adventures, more than I could even think up. So my family consisted of mom and dad and 4 children and a Nana that came to stay with them from time to time, who was a lot more fun than their parents were. She was the kind of Nana that I always aspired to be. But here is our island. And if you come see me after, I'll have one of these bookmarks you can have. And the adventure started right from the very beginning on a trip to the mainland to get necessary goods. It was very infrequent that they went to the mainland. So you have parents on an island that is not really reachable easily, with these little children who have to be educated, but they also have to learn how to work, because everyone on the lighthouse had jobs, even the youngest. At 4 and 5 years old, they had jobs that they had to do, and there was a schedule. Everything had to be done when it was supposed to be done. And the daughter had to learn to cook, and the boys had to learn about running the lighthouse, and they sustained storms and problems with illness and all kinds of things that a real lighthouse family would have at that time. They also had visits from the inspector, which was always fun because everyone had to do extra chores, clean more, and present themselves in clean clothes when the inspector came. The children were very nervous about that whole thing. But it was the kind of family that you hoped every child had a chance to grow up in. One where the parents were what they were supposed to be, and the kids were disciplined well but loved well, and they ended up being the kind of adults, in my mind, that I would like to have, in my larger family. And I can't tell you why I even finished it. I mean, it was, for a while it seemed to go on with chapters and chapters, and then I reordered them and redid the timeline and all of that kind of stuff, and got my brother to paint this beautiful picture. And then I was lucky enough to have a granddaughter who is an artist as well, and she did all of the pictures inside the book. I'll find one here. This is the ghost. You have to have a ghost if you have a lighthouse, You can't have a lighthouse without a ghost. It just doesn't work. So there he is. And I think Sky did a terrific job with him. And she didn't make him look like her grandfather, so I thought that was wise. You also have to expect, if you live way out on a lighthouse island, that you have a shipwreck. And with a shipwreck, you have sometimes some survivors who you end up being responsible for. And this shipwreck, we don't think about it today because of our environment now and our temperatures. But places like Camden Harbor and Rockport Harbor 100 years ago would have frozen in the winter. Kids ice skated on them, and now you won't even find an ice cube in them in the wintertime. But there were you see the little boy, I don't know if you can see him, but the ship was solid in the ice, and he was standing on the ice looking at it. And that must have seemed really strange. You know, the boat couldn't move, and he couldn't go very far either. So it was a challenge at times to do the writing, and I could only write in the summer because I was fully occupied in the wintertime. But it was also great to interview people who had lived on Lighthouse Islands, and Roy hadn't lived on any, but I picked his father's brains for a while because his grandfather had been out there, and they had heard lots of stories about what it was like to be out on a remote island in the middle of the winter. Although Roy's great-grandfather Howard was just out here, so they could walk, in the winter. They could walk in. I don't know if any of you have ever seen the road that goes so you can see the side of Curtis Island out here. But if you go, there's a little beach there, and if that were frozen, you could just walk right across. It's probably no further than I am to the back of the church. Not, of course it doesn't freeze anymore. But you could swim over. There's a little beach there. Yeah. So I guess what I want to say is, if you have something that you feel deeply about, and you know something, even if it's a story of your family, or something that you could fill in the blanks, certain things about it, but you could invent the rest to make the story fully developed. I recommend doing it. If you only do it for yourself, or if you do it for your children or grandchildren or grandparents, so they could see how you have pulled a story out of things that you knew and heard when you were small, and it's a lot of fun, really. Sometimes I put it down for weeks at a time. It's not something that you can just do it out straight. Well, of course, I was teaching, and I was disciplining young minds and things like that. So I didn't do much during the winter. It was mostly summer, and mostly sitting in the Gilley house at Simon and Corner, and not even. I think I had finished quite a bit of it before I got a computer, so I could actually put it into the computer. I had printed pages first, and it took me a long time, probably because I'm not disciplined that way, and I like to think about where it was going to go and try things out. And I relied on my husband to answer my questions, and I thank him for his encouragement. He told me I could do it, and I did it. So, any questions about lighthouse keeping or that time of period or anything else?
Jan,
Yeah.
what was the time period?
1920s and into the 30s. Yeah. And it was cold out there then. It was, it was not easy. And it wasn't easy when you had restrictions like the food supply and things, when you had a family out on the island and how they were going to make sure that you got fed, and how your kids were going to get educated. It was all your job, you know. I mean, they did. They had a garden in the summer, and of course they fished. They could get fish easily. And they had a lot of work. They really had a lot of work. And the kids all, you know, they had their work and they had to do it. And there wasn't much room to be naughty, but they did manage a bit. You know, they worked with one another, and then they, you know, had their own things to do. And there was a big age difference, too, between the oldest child and the youngest one. But I highly recommend it. It's a fun read. It's available on Amazon, and I think still at the where did I buy? One of the stores in town has them too, but you can get them online. Yes. Oh, 11. Yeah. Yeah. You didn't exactly walk, did you, from there?
No, it was just, they went up to get the mail.
Yeah, right. The mailboat. I think I have a mailboat in here that comes along.
But no, they walked 11 miles to get to the main line so they could pick up the
Oh, pick up the mail. Woo.
But they didn't do it once a week, maybe once a month, would you say?
I don't remember the time, but there usually was days and days, and there was always a lot of mail.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it was really isolated,
It was.
you know, very isolated.
27 people, and there were 2 families. Was it
Uh-huh,
one room schoolhouse?
uh-huh.
Iron, Nova Scotia.
Ah, where in Nova Scotia?
Pardon?
Where in Nova Scotia?
Ironbound.
Ironbound.
That's the island.
Uh-huh.
Maybe Chester, Lunenburg.
Oh, Lunenburg, yeah. Yeah. My mother was a Nova Scotian. My mother was raised in Nova Scotia. And yeah, I think it's very, I mean, when a youngster reads this today, they think this is all fiction. You know, well, it is fiction, but they can't imagine kids having to do what they have to do here. Yeah. Of course, there's no TV, there's no radio, there's nothing to connect you with anything else. One of my favorite parts of the writing was that their grandmother comes to stay and visit. And I had a grandmother who lived in New Brunswick, who came to stay with us every year for 2 or 3 weeks, maybe a month, and then she went home. So I think that was one of the easiest parts for me to write, because I knew what it was like when my Nana came. It was just wonderful. That's who taught me to knit, and that's who taught me to sew, and all those things that I still love to do that my mother couldn't do at all. But Nana took care of that. Her cooking was something else. I'd rather have my mother cook than my Nana cook. But I think it's, I mean, how long will we remember times like this when people lived in a different kind of way? There's so much communication today that everybody all around the world knows what everybody else is doing. And it's so easy to pick up the phone or get on the computer and talk to someone, oops, thousands of miles away. And this just shows an entirely different time and what it was like not to be able to do any of those things. And what did you do? What did you do to entertain yourself when you weren't working? When you were, all those kids had jobs. They worked every day. And I can't imagine even raising my kids and making them work as much in the house as these kids. They all had chores, but this was something different.
Did you do it as a master thesis? Did you get it done?
Yes, I did.
What did you-
Yes, I got my master's at Wesleyan University in
So
Connecticut.
the book counted toward.
It was my thesis. It was my thesis, really. Yeah. I was at the, I got a Master of Arts in Liberal Studies, they called it, because they had to okay your plan, and Wesleyan is not, Wesleyan's is a very kind of free-thinking, but solidly academic school. But they liked it when people did something other than the, tried and true. Anyway, any other questions? No?
Thank you, Janet.
You're welcome. I hope you'll all read it. Go get it in the library. You don't have to buy it. It's in the library. Thank you.